standpoints. Last week, I was part of the panel discussion from our law enforcement, fire, EMS group about opioid addiction and what they are dealing with and what we're having to deal with from that standpoint. And then this week, we're going to be talking about how to talk to your youth about opioid misuse and how to go about that, and also how to keep your people and your family and everyone safe from opioid addiction, hopefully, best case scenario. So with that, I'm going to go to our next. It's going to be we're going to be co-hosting this. We're going to be trading off. I'm Officer John Warbeck with the Clarkston Police Department. I'm also the current school resource officer for the Clarkston School District. I'm also chairperson for the EPIC Coalition here in Clarkston. And I'm going to be hosting this with Kimberly, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Kimberly Schaub, and I am the program specialist with the Boys and Girls Clubs of the Lewis-Clark Valley. So I work at both of our Lewiston and Clarkston clubs.
Thank you. All right.
So we're just going to make a quick poll. So you'll see up on your screen, the first question is going to ask you, how knowledgeable do you feel about opioids? The second, do you currently lock up your medication, talk to your doctor about pain management alternatives, save expired or unused opioid medications, talk to your youth about opioid misuse, know how to recognize signs of opioid misuse, know how to respond to an opioid overdose, or none of these? Once you're done, you can click submit.
We're about halfway there, a little over. All right, we are gonna just close this poll here.
So it looks like from the survey's results, a lot of you are pretty knowledgeable, so that is great. And then 22% of you lock up your medications, 11% talk to your doctor, and you can see those results on your screen. So we will hit, things on each of these subjects. And our presentation objectives today are to know about opioids and their associated risks, learn tips on how to effectively communicate with youth to prevent opioid misuse, gain tools to opioid-proof your home, learn ways to prevent opioid misuse in our community, know what to do when a youth is prescribed an opioid, be able to identify signs of opioid misuse and safely ending it, and learn how to recognize and respond to an overdose.
Opioids in our community. Opioids are now one of the leading causes of injury-related deaths in Washington State. I just came across this fact the other day, and it was really surprising, and it's almost kind of scary too, that we've now surpassed the number of car crashes and injury-related deaths from car crashes. Opioids have replaced that, as kind of taken over as number one. Our youth opioid misuse in our community. This was from our 2018 Washington Health Youth Survey of 10th graders in Clarkston, Washington. We had 8% that had used prescription painkillers to get high in the last 30 days, 5% higher than the state average. We have 12% used prescription drugs not prescribed to them in the last 30 days. That was 7% higher than our state average. And the perception of availability of drugs increased by 7%. And 2017, there were 660. So there was 4 hydrocodone prescriptions for every 1,000 residents in Clarkston. That's roughly 4,620 prescriptions in Clarkston. is staggering, kind of when you think about that, the number of prescription that are out there in our community. Youth opioid misuse in the Washington State, young adults 18 to 25 years old have the highest use, with 9% reporting they've used pain reliever non-medically. 2018, about 2,500 Washington State 12th graders had tried heroin at least once in their lifetime. Even more, about 3,500 use painkillers to get high in any given month. The young are also involved with first exposed to opioids through prescriptions. Dentist prescriptions alone account for 31% of adolescents' first exposure to opioids. When we looked at the statistics and stuff, the dentist prescriptions were way up there compared to the other ones. The only other thing that I've seen too is from injury, accidents, and opioid prescriptions from that.
Okay, and moving on, I'm going to talk about the basics of opioids. They are a class of drugs, both illegal and legal, and they're commonly used to reduce pain. So opioids can affect the body in many different ways. As I said, they're a class of a drug or medications used to relieve pain. We have opioid receptors in our bodies, and opioid drugs and medications work to reduce the pain signals that we're receiving, to make the pain we have from an injury or surgery less intense. However, opioids can also work in our brains to create a pleasurable effect that can encourage some people to continue using them after they no longer need them. The longer they are used and with larger quantities, they slowly start to change the chemistry of the brain. Soon, the brain needs the opioid drug or medication to maintain that feeling. So as I said, they dull the perception of pain by mimicking chemicals in the brain that relieve that pain by binding to receptors on the nerves. And this binding is what creates the euphoric or high feeling one gets when using opioids. So the repeated binding process reduces the body's reaction to its natural chemicals, which then makes them highly addictive to the brain, which then makes one very dependent on using them to function. So who is affected by opioids? Opioids are highly addictive, and anyone taking prescription opioids could easily become addicted. The misuse most often begins with a person using medication that wasn't prescribed for them. Teens are part of this demographic where misuse is growing. So 75% of opioid misuse starts with people, again, that are taking medications that weren't prescribed for them, and they're usually taken from a friend or family member. And 1 in 4 teens, just to add a statistic to that demographic, report having misused or abused a prescription drug at least once in their lifetime. So any use of substance, illegal or legal, medically or recreationally, is considered substance use, but there are differences between the kinds of use of a substance. The differences may seem subtle, but it is important to recognize the differences between misuse, abuse, and addiction when discussing prevention and intervention work. Understanding the connection between misuse and addiction and use can inform the way we communicate the dangers of substances and help to reduce the stigma of persons suffering from addictions. So as you can see on your screen, it kind of just defines misuse. So the use of controlled prescription drugs and over-the-counter medications for purposes not prescribed or intended, such as to get high, feel stimulated or sedated, taking more of the substance than prescribed or recommended, or taking the substance too often or for a longer period of time than was prescribed or recommended. Abuse is the use of a psychoactive substance in a manner detrimental to the individual or society, but not meeting criteria for substance or drug dependence. And then addiction is a primary chronic neurobiological disease with genetic, psychosocial, and environmental factors influencing its development and manifestations. It is characterized by behaviors that include one or more of the following: impaired control over drug use, compulsive use, continued use despite harm, and craving.
So what we want to get into is actually talking to our kids about drugs. I know it can be tough at times, and people struggle with how to bring it up, how to go through it, and can really cause some issues sometimes for families as well, especially if they have someone that's abusing drugs currently in their family. But it's one of those things that we really need to do. Statistics show that that kids are 50% less likely to use drugs when their parents to talk to them about the risk. So we want to make sure we open up those lines of communication. Now, how do we do that? Little things can make a big impact. We need to carve out time to connect with our kids. And what I mean by that is that we're creating time that's away from the screen, that's away from their phones, it's away from their tablets or laptops. I don't know how many times I've been out to dinner or in public settings and stuff, and you'll see a family, and guess what? All four of them are just sitting there on their phones, not looking at each other, not talking, and they're just on their phone the whole time. We need to kind of break our habits of that. We want to be able to talk to our kids. We want to be able to do something, whether it's just getting together for 1 or 2 meals a week, or game nights, activities, anything we can do to try to make those connections, because those connections is what's going to last a lifetime. That's what develops those bonds. That's what develops that ability for those kids to not be afraid to come forward, to share things if they feel more comfortable doing that. At the same time, we want to make ourselves available to them. And what do I mean by that? Is that we remind them you're there for them. I think sometimes we get so busy and so wrapped up in our hectic lifestyles that we don't necessarily remind our kids that, hey, we're here for you. If you need somebody to talk to, you need somebody to lean on, you need somebody to be able to, have a shoulder or something just to talk to them. That's what we want to be able to do with our kids. And then when we're doing that, we'll also that's undivided attention, and we're going to remove those distractions. Again, we're not going to be talking to them and on our phone at the same time. We're not going to be trying to hold a conversation and we're doing our work on our laptops or whatever. That we devote that time to them and we give them the chance to talk to us, and that we actually listen to what they're saying. Little things with a big impact: listen more and actively. Start a conversation, but listen to what they're saying, listen to what they are and are not saying. As a law enforcement officer, there's a lot of times where I'm involved in the interviewing or I'm questioning somebody, and it's so funny because you're listening to what they're saying, but you're also listening to what they're not saying, what they're not bringing up. Are they deliberately steering a conversation one way when you know that something else is going on? I encourage parents to kind of be that little detective when they're talking to their kids. And I'm not saying that you put the spotlight in front of them, you're doing an interrogation with them, but at least talk to them and listen to what they're saying. Encourage them, share with them experiences that you've had, maybe they've had. Recap their points. When I taught classes on communication, one of the big things I always taught people was that when you're done talking to somebody, you should be able to go back and tell or reiterate exactly what they just told you. If you get done with the conversation, you go, I don't remember what they said. What was that again that you said? That you've lost it. You haven't listened to a word they said, and we want to get away from that. We offer support, but we're not being judgmental. If one thing that I could get across to people is take that pause and calm down, especially when you are all fired up, or you just heard your kids doing drugs, you heard that they did something, and you come in all fired up and, well, that was really stupid. Why would you do such a dumb thing? And you start off with that approach, I guarantee that kid's going to shut down, and they are not going to listen to anything after that point in time. So if nothing else, if you could just take that time to calm down, to respond to them after you've had that chance to calm down, you're going to react better. You're going to make better judgments. Even if you're starting off with trying to build that trust for your future conversations, I understand you made a mistake, but where do we go from here? How do we fix that? How do we go forward? Those kind of things are just huge in being able to talk with your kids. conversation starters to give you kind of an idea here when you're talking how to communicate boundaries. It's okay to say no to friends. Open it up. You know, hey, I heard that the kids at school, I've heard some friends talking about that people experimenting with drugs. Is that what you've heard? Is that what you were listening to? You know, have your friends approached you about using drugs? If they have, what was your reaction? How'd you react to that? What did you say? If you look at number 2 in here, it says you can always use me as an excuse. If there's one thing that I heard more frequently than anything else during my work as a DARE officer and anti-drug campaigns and everything, is the kids saying, I use my parents as an excuse. Because when I got into something, I said, no way, I cannot do that. I'm going to be in so much trouble with my parents. I'm going to be grounded for the rest of my life. I'm going to get my car taken away. I'm going to get my privilege. I mean, feel free to use that. And I mean, and I know kids have done that, and kids will continue to use that. Use you as an excuse. Nope, my parents would ground me for life if I do this. And don't be afraid to let them know that. Use that. If you're in an uncomfortable situation, you're in a bad spot, don't hesitate to call and have me come pick you up, come help you out. Let them know that that's acceptable, and that you'll come and pick them up without the judgment, without screaming and yelling at them, without that whole stigma of, oh God, I call my parents, they're going to, I'm going to be in a bunch of trouble. Let them know that you're still there for them. And if you're in trouble, you're always going to be there for them. You're going to be able to help them out when they need you the most, and that hopefully it can rely on you. And that's what we want to build, is that concept. We're going to share why and how prescription are used. Prescription medication is for that person it's prescribed for, and there's a reason for that, because there are health and safety issues with it. If I'm prescribed something and I give that to somebody else, that doctor, they have no idea. That doctor prescribed it for me because he knows what kind of things are going on with me. He knows what problems I have or I don't have and what works for me. He didn't prescribe it for somebody else. And we really need to clarify that with the kids, because I think sometimes they think, well, it's just pain medication, they just prescribe it to everybody. Well, no, they prescribe certain amounts and certain kinds and certain things to different people. We need to make sure they know that. What would you do if you were offered somebody else's medication? Kind of role play with them too. Say, hey, okay, here's what's happening. You're at a game and somebody walks up to you and says, here, try this. What are you going to do? How are you going to react to that? What are you going to tell them? And again, it's about them. Make sure you leave room for them to tell you what they've already experienced, what they've been through, what people have already told them, maybe even, what's out there. I don't know how many times I've done presentations and I've come away learning probably as much as I presented in some of my presentations, just because of that. Saying, yeah, what are you experiencing? What are you facing? What are you up against? And again, going back to that listening and sharing what you come up with. And if you share your own experience, focus on having healthy boundaries, not your experience with a substance. Sometimes people get into that too, that they share, well, I did drugs when I was a kid and I smoked and I drank and I did all this stuff and I'm fine now. And it really sends a bad message of, yeah, well, it's okay, but you probably should not encourage that at the same time. You want to make sure that when you're talking to them that, yeah, this is what happened, and I got in a lot of trouble, or things happened as a result of your drug use, or maybe you didn't, and you can easily share that too, that I had these goals. I wanted to play sports. I wanted to go into this particular profession. So I definitely did not do it just because I knew that's where I was headed. That's what I wanted to do. So there's just a lot of different ways that we can work around this and get them around that whole abuse and use situation. Conversation starters too is to check in about their stress levels, overall well-being. This year's been chaotic. I mean, we've been in school, we've been out of school, we've been part days, half days, part of the kids coming one day, part of the kids coming another day. And now next week, we're going back to full-time in learning school. So it's got to be hectic and crazy for these kids. And, talk to them about it. Say, hey, what's causing you stress? What are you worried about? What are you stressed out about? What can we do to help you with that? And we want to also, at the same time that we're doing that, remind them that drugs are not an excuse for that. Drugs are not a way out of that. That, okay, yeah, I'm going to start doing drugs because that'll help me forget all my problems. Well, that's great. But then guess what? When you come off of drugs, problems are still there. And if not, now you've got additional problems with the drugs. So we want to be able to explain that to them, make sure they understand that it's not a way to avoid it, or it's not a way to get out of having to use drugs, that it's not going to escape their problems. And again, that you're always there for that love and support. If they've already started, what about that? I get that question frequently. What if my kids are already using drugs? What am I going to do? tell them, confront them about, tell them you know about it. But and again, try to be calm and constructive. And I know that can be very difficult sometimes for people because it's like, oh my God, my kid's doing drugs. I'm going to kill him. I'm going to strangle him. I'm like, and you're just freaking out about it. And I understand that. But at the same time, that's the last thing they need in that situation. They need somebody to come in and say, okay, I understand it. You're in here. How'd you start? What got you hooked? What started? Why did you start? I mean, all these things. The one question that I constantly got hit with is like, well, you're never going to stop every kid from doing drugs. Well, no, I'm not. And you know why? Because until we eliminate all the reasons why people start using drugs in the first place, we're never going to eliminate drugs. So it's important to find out those things. You know, why did you start? What led you into it? What got you using? And what are we going to do to cure it? What are we going to do to get you out of it? How are we going to help? And give them those hopeful things too. You know, yeah, we can work through this. We can beat this. We can do something to get you away from it. And hopefully you do, and we can do that. And then remind them too that you're always going to be there to support them, no matter good, bad, ugly, that you're going to be there to help them. And then that's what you want for them, is that they have that healthy life and the life they deserve.
So that leads us just kind of sharing the importance of you knowing how important you are, and that you are more important than you might feel. Young people who have a strong bond with their parent and whose parents express disapproval of substance use have a lower risk of misuse. So that's kind of where we come in. So we can help grow healthy behaviors. Kids are 50% less likely to use drugs when parents tell them about the risks. So it's just important to educate them on, you know, what could happen if they do choose to make those choices. But with strong bonds with their parents and community members and just people that love and support them, that express the disapproval of substances, they have a lower risk of misuse. So in 2018, in Washington, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders, you know, in that category, over 80% say their parents think it is very wrong to use prescription drugs not prescribed to them. 2/3 of that, you know, area of survey perceive prescription drug use to carry great risk of harm. And then in 2018, for Clarkston, 8th and 10th graders, over 91% of their parents think it's wrong to use prescription drugs that are not prescribed to them, and 83% perceive prescription drug use to carry great risk of harm. That's kind of a little bit of information. So that brings us to our goal, obviously, is to teach our kids healthy behaviors in our communities for all children and youth. And that starts with healthy beliefs and clear standards in families, schools, the Boys and Girls Club, communities, and peer groups. And then that comes with building the bond with attachment and commitment to families, schools, communities, and peer groups. So getting them involved in things inside their community and at school, you know, where they create that bond with positive influences. And then that kind of just provides them with the opportunity, skills, and recognition. And then you get the individual characteristics. So you see it all kind of play out like a ladder. So all those things lead to youth and teens to, you know, have those support people that are behind them, you know, trying to help them make the best healthy and safe decisions.
What we also wanted to focus on a little bit today is making it a safe place for your kids in your home, and doing some things to kind of opioid proofing your home. Where we store our medications, and when we no longer need them, are we getting them taken care of? Are we getting rid of them? So we're going to go into a little bit of details about that. One of the things we look at is we have 3 things that we want to look at. Only that we have active medication that all our old prescriptions are removed immediately and we get rid of those. We have a safe storage plan for active prescriptions, and we know the amount and locations of those active prescriptions. So we kind of got 5 things that we kind of look at here. The 2 big ones, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail on this, but we want to look at pain management alternatives. Do we have other things that we could be doing? We're going to have that conversation with our family members. We're going to pay attention to the prescriptions that we have. Are they properly stored? And then how are we going to properly dispose of those? So we're going to break those down a little bit more detail. So where do we start? When we talk to our doctor about pain management alternatives, when we first get something prescribed, we're going to ask them, is this an opioid? How long can I expect to take them? Is there an alternative to it? I mean, is it something that I don't necessarily need? Could I get by with Tylenol? Could I get by with something else? Physical therapy, is there other options out there? And we're going to kind of have that discussion as well. Have that conversation with our family. We're going to explain that opioids, how they work, what they are, the proper use of prescription medication, why our prescriptions are locked up, and for the safety of everyone. And again, going back to what we kind of highlighted earlier, is that these prescriptions are for you and no one else, that it's not just a blanket, oh yeah, here's pain meds and whoever needs them, well, here you go. And the reasons why that's dangerous and can be very dangerous for people in the family. We're going to pay attention to our medication, what we have and how much we have. I don't know how many times I've responded to theft of medication calls or people having their medication stolen. And well, how did many? I don't know. I had a bottle of this and I had a bottle of that, and I don't know how many I had in there. So we want to make sure we keep track of that stuff for a number of reasons. We want to know how many pills are available and keep account on that. We want to keep our prescriptions in a locked bag in the kitchen or in a locked container, whatever it takes to keep them locked up from someone using them. I know I've had situations where family members were using other family members' pain medication and they weren't aware of it. I mean, until it got to the point where they had medical issues and had to respond and had to deal with it. But again, if you're sneaking 1 or 2 pills out of a bottle every single day and they're not paying close attention to that, it may not get caught. So we want to make sure that we're keeping a track of that and we know how many are in there. Is this prescription being actively used? If it's not, we need to get rid of it. And we're going to give you some ideas on that here in a little bit. Proper storage, lock them up. We have prescription lock boxes. I have a number of lock boxes. I've had people come into my office and say, well, yeah, how am I supposed to lock this up? What do I do? I got kids in the house and I have prescription drugs, and what do I do with this? We have lock boxes available, and I've got some in my office if anybody's interested in that too. But I mean, even lock them in a file cabinet, lock them in a locking cabinet. If you've got a safe at home, put them in there. Any place that you can do to secure them and keep them. Think of it, like, well, I've got a really expensive watch or I've got gold coins or something. Would I leave those laying around my house? No, you'd get them locked up. You'd secure them someplace. You want to have that same thought process with your medications. Secure your prescription medication. So properly dispose of those unused, unwanted, or expired medications. We have a drop box in the PD lobby, the Clarkston Police Department. That's open between 8 and noon and 1 and 5. You can come by there anytime and drop off unwanted prescriptions. We have the Public Health North Idaho Central District. They have the drug deactivation bags that you can dump your meds in. It goes into a bag. Molly's holding one up there to the camera. You put your meds in that and it basically neutralizes those meds, and then you can safely dispose of them. We're going to have a couple more. We've got prescription drug take back days. We did one earlier, and we're going to have another one coming up on the 24th, and that'll be from 10 to 2. And so you can swing by the Ysoga County Fire District up here in the Heights, Clarkston Heights, or you can swing by Clarkston Police Department. We'll be there from 10 to 2. So keep that date in mind too. If you have things that you want to get rid of and you've got a lot of prescriptions piling up that you want to get rid of, feel free to bring them by on those days and we'll get them taken care of for you. Keep medication away from family and pets and also out of our water supply. So I also hear the thing, well, I'll just flush everything down the toilet. Well, that's great. But you know what that does? That puts that into a whole different system and causes problems that way too. The other stuff, take them out and bury them. I'll throw them away. I'll put them in the trash. All these other option things that end up causing problems, not only for family, but pets get into it, animals get into it, all the other stuff that is exposed to it by that way. So we want to do it the right way. And again, we've got a lot of drop places. I think Lewiston Lewiston Police Department has a drop box. There's a bunch of them out there, so there's really no reason not to be able to get rid of those meds when you need to. What to do when your child is prescribed an opioid. Building healthy habits around prescription medication. Be honest about everything you're doing. Discuss it with them. Talk to them. Tell them, you know, this is what we're doing and this is what we're taking, but this is how we're going to do that. Lead by example. Follow the 5 most important ways to avoid to what we just talked about, those 5 things. Make sure you're doing that in your home, because if you've got those in place, you're going to be pretty secure with your medication. And hopefully they've already been talked to, like we just mentioned. We've already been talked to about their medication use and why it's important that only those people prescribed are the ones using that medication. Talk to the doctors. Is prescription necessary to treat the pain? I mean, feel free to question your doctors. I mean, I don't know how many times I've been into stuff, or I've been in an ER, family members and everything else, and it's like, oh, well, here, we'll just give you a prescription for this, and 20, 30 pain meds and stuff, and it's like, well, are you really going to need that, or do they need that, or well, I'm not even in pain. Well, yeah, okay, then we don't need it. I mean, don't hesitate to contact them sometimes, because that can be a road to lead you into more use, especially if you've got them and you've got a ton of them. And I've seen situations where they've been prescribed a ton of medication that they probably would never have been able to use, even if they were using it for the pain they had. So question them about it. How long, what are the risks? What are the likelihood of possibly getting addicted to it? And those kind of things. Signs of misuse. What are your other options? I mean, you've got a lot of alternatives a lot of time to pain management too. And there's a lot of options out there. What to do when your child is prescribed an opioid. Have that conversation with your child about the pain. Tell them the risk. Tell them not to share it with other people. I've had kids at the school. Again, I've had kids that were sharing their pain medication, and I don't know if it was so much that they were doing it on purpose or that they just didn't know that they couldn't do that. Well, I got this and they gave it to me, so I'm sharing with my friends. Well, no, you're not, because you're now committing a crime and you can get yourself in a lot of trouble. So we want to make sure that they understand that, and that they understand the risks that they're putting those kids at potentially too by sharing those medications with them. Regulate your child's prescription. What is the prescription for? How many they're supposed to take? How long will be taken? Watch them and see, make sure that they are not doing something that they're not supposed to with them. Make sure that a bunch of pills aren't coming up missing, and those kind of things. Just kind of monitor it. And I think you're a lot better off, because you can kind of keep an eye on things and make sure your kids are doing okay. But I'm not saying that oh my God, my kid's in pain, so oh God, I'm never going to do a prescription drugs for them, because then they'll end up strung out on prescription drugs. If they need it, they need it. And and there's no problem with that. But then again, at the same time, we don't over medicate them with it either. So we got to kind of hit that fine line in between.
Okay, so now we're gonna just talk about recognizing opioid abuse and overdoses. So research has shown that kids are 50% less likely to use drugs when parents talk to them about the risks. So as I kind of talked about earlier, we talked about the misuse, abuse, and addiction. So it's just important to know the difference between all of those, and any use of a substance is considered use. So it's just important to remember that. I won't read it again for the sake of you all. And then the signs of opioid abuse and stopping abuse safely. So some of the signs are regularly taking more than the prescribed dose of medication, which then causes them to run out early. Taking medication just in case, even when not in pain. Having extreme mood changes and being secretive. Borrowing medication from other people or using medication prescribed for someone else. And then suffering direct negative consequences from use. So John kind of talked about these things as well, but just some things to look for. So stopping opioid abuse safely, it should be treated seriously and be assisted by a medical doctor and behavioral health specialists. There's different kind of programs and treatments that are available. There's the medication, I gotta look up the acronym. Medications for opioid misuse or opioid use disorder. So that is FDA approved medications that are used in combination with counseling to prevent the use of opioids.
We also, while we're talking about, we want to look at responding to an overdose. How can I help save a life? What do I do if I suspect that someone is suffering from an opioid overdose? It takes place when levels of opioids are too high in a person's system. Sorry. Opioid takes place when the levels are too high in a person's system. An overdose can happen suddenly or come on slowly over the course of a few hours. National news, we've seen some of these situations where some of the people that went in suffered immediately and hit the ground, where other people, it may take a little bit of time for it to have an effect. We also don't want to think that, well, it's only people that are abusing opioids that end up overdosing on them. There's a lot of people out there that are taking prescription opioid medication and sometimes may not remember, right? As you get into the older population and stuff that, well, I take 3 in the morning, I take 3 in the afternoon, I take 3 at lunchtime, or, okay, what did I take mine? No, I took them in the morning. No, wait, I took them. Well, I better take 3 more because I forgot if I took these, and they end up taking way more, and that can sometimes cause it too. So we have to be cautious all the way around with them because it may not be intentional. It may be completely accidental on the person's part. Adults play a powerful role talking to youth about sharing life-saving information. You want to let your youth and young adults know about the signs, symptoms, what they're looking at if they think or they suspect someone's going into an opioid overdose situation. And then what are they going to do? What are their fears? They feel comfortable guiding, advising a response, empower yourself and how you prevent overdoses. One of the questions that came up for us last week on our panel discussion was, are people hesitant to call on opioid overdoses because they're afraid that when they call, the police are going to show up and everybody's going to go to jail because they're illegally using opioid stuff? And I can tell you that, yes, that does happen. There's been a couple times where we got to the scene almost too late because the person, they could not save them because they had waited so long, and that was their fear. They were afraid that the police were going to get there, people were going to be arrested, and so they didn't call. So we want to kind of hit these things ahead of time, especially with our kids. Hey, if you're at a party and this kid goes out, you better be calling somebody immediately because that time frame is very, very narrow for helping somebody that goes into an overdose situation. And don't be afraid of that. I mean, we have certain laws and rules in place for people that call in, and Good Samaritan laws too, that protect people from that kind of thing as well. So we want to get that across to our kids too, and our young adults, that they know that if there's something going on, get that medical attention there as soon as they can. So what do we do? How do we respond to an overdose? First of all, we want to stay calm. And I know that's crazy. Sometimes people say, yeah, stay calm. Sure, somebody's dying in front of me and I'm going to just stay calm and watch it. But we want to stay calm as much as we can. We're going to assess their condition. We're getting on the phone immediately to 911 for help, realizing that if we call 911 or any of those numbers, it goes through central dispatch system here. So if you need fire, EMS, police, any of that, it all goes through the same place. So you get the help that you need there. Physical stimulation, what they mean by that is that you're going to be checking that person, physically shaking them. Hey, are you okay? Are you all right? Seeing if you can get a response, any kind of response from them. And that's what you're also going to be checking for of the overdoses, that they're unresponsive, they're turning blue lips and nails, their breathing is down to almost non-existent, or choking or gurgling sounds. Give naloxone and give rescue breaths, and then stay with the person until medical help arrives. You may or may not have that. What they're talking about on that one is the actual Narcan that our paramedics and all of them are carrying to try to bring people back. And I think that's in our next slide. And this is what they're talking about. That's the brand name for Narcan, and it's a medication designed to reverse an opioid overdose. So it's basically a nasal inhaler. What you do is, if you suspect someone's doing that, they'll bring it up, put them in their nasal passage, and then they will spray that into their nose. It's an extremely safe medication, and it only has a noticeable effect on people that are suffering from an opioid overdose. If they are methamphetamine, cocaine, any of the other Valium, any of these other narcotics or stimulant drugs, it's not going to do anything. This is strictly for opioid overdose and to get them back. I know the people, the paramedics and even officers and stuff that I've seen this used and done on people. I mean, it brings them back immediately. It is really pulls them right out of that overdose. And it can cause, it says in here, can cause withdrawal symptoms, which may be uncomfortable, but are not life-threatening. And what it does is when they're in that euphoric state of overdosing on that drug, it snaps them out of that state of mind and brings them back to reality quickly. So sometimes those situations can escalate too, because we've had it where they've come back and they become violent or they get upset because you've now pulled them out of their drug state that they were in. And I realized that I just saved your life. And it's like, well, yeah, but you screwed up my high. So you've got that to deal with sometimes too as well. But again, we're saving their life as opposed to watching them lay there and die and overdose. So.
Okay, now we just wanted to open it up for any of you that have questions. So feel free to take yourself off of mute or put your questions in the chat box.
There's one person had a comment in here, said there are doctors who are prescribing chronic opioid medications and prescribing Narcan for them at home also. It's kind of a double-edged sword. It's like you're prescribing their stuff that's going to hurt them, and then if they do overdose, then here's how you treat yourself. And that's only if they can administer themselves too. And I've seen that, unfortunately, with drugs, the same thing that doctors are prescribing. And when I explained this last week to people too, is that what happens when people start to use a drug is that they'll get that initial super high, and it takes them way up here. And then once they crash, they come down and they go way below their baseline. And then what happens, they'll try to take drugs again, it'll take them right back up, but it's not that same high. And they just, that continuing and up and down until they're so low underneath their baseline. What they'll do a lot of times is they'll go into a doctor, and the doctor will say, okay, well, it looks like you're suffering from depression, so I'm going to give you stimulants to get you back up and get you back online. And guess what? That pulls them back up, and they start that vicious cycle all over again. So yeah, I think sometimes that can be dangerous, because they are getting prescribed stuff and then they're also counteracting what they're prescribing, so it can cause problems as well. But that's a good point that you brought up. Any other questions? And again, if you have questions or anything comes up, feel free to contact me. I'm at the Clarkston High School. You can contact me there. I think our contact information is in the PowerPoint here too, phone numbers and stuff. So anytime you have a question or concern or something comes up, and again, you'd be surprised how many times I get questions, or I even have people call in volunteering things that they've heard, things that they know is going on, things they know the kids are doing, and that just helps me that much more be able to deal with that. And again, a lot of the stuff as I do as an SRO isn't necessarily enforcement. I'm not out there to slam and jam as many kids as I can. I'm got into that position because I want to help as many kids as I can. So a lot of times knowing what they're up against, the drugs they're using, what they're experiencing, what they're going through, helps me too, and helps me better deal with it. So.
So if there isn't any more questions, I think we're going to move on to a survey.
So, I'm going to put, so after every presentation, we've been asking attendees to fill out a survey for us. This is going to help us, determine if we were successful in communicating information to our community members. And if you want additional information or resources, you can also put in your information on those surveys. So I provided that link in the chat box. And then the last thing we do ask people to do is if you could please take our second poll, which is flip flop with the first one just so we can kind of gauge, you know, if this presentation went well. So if you can please answer the poll questions, that would be fantastic. And again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to reach out to our presenters or myself. You can go to epic.com. And we also have an information session next week that's about recovery resources in our community that we would be happy for you to participate in. And you can find all of our information